Thank you for tuning into the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. I'm your fervent feminist host, Raven O'Neill, and I get the honors of sitting down with women experts from all walks of life to discuss the ideas, opportunities, and the strategies that women can take advantage of to get ahead in our patriarchal society. So, if one of your love languages is learning how to hack patriarchal systems and structures, I invite you to join us and help move the needle. Today I'm sitting down with Katrina Purcell. Katrina is a Columbia Business School graduate and former chief of staff, PMO head, and product operations leader who has now founded her own firm. With a passion for serving minority-led organizations and nonprofits, her company supports tech startups and nonprofits from seed to Series C through strategic planning, operational excellence, agile transformation, and capital raise support. Based in Brooklyn with her husband, pets, and a love for volunteering, Katrina lives life to the fullest. Let's come together and offer Katrina a very warm welcome. Welcome, Katrina. It's so great to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Me too. So today's topic, we are diving into scaling a business. So let's start out. What unique strategies can female business leaders employ to foster resilience and adaptability within their businesses?
So women really need to lean into their superpowers, right? So oftentimes we are much more empathetic. We are much more risk adverse, right? We see kind of all the ways that things can go wrong, which is great because it means that we're able to plan for those eventualities. But I think oftentimes that leaves us in a position of not wanting to make a decision or being too nervous to kind of pick a path and put all of our effort into that path. And so we really have to kind of check ourselves and surround ourselves with a good group of people who can say, I know you're risk adverse, but looking at these three options, this is really the option that we need to kind of put all our eggs in that basket. And I think that notoriously men are much better at that, right? Because they just have this confidence in loads, right? And who even knows where it comes from, but they're just able to kind of bull and china shop their way through on a path. And if it doesn't work, they don't take it personally. They're able to just say, it didn't work. And most likely it's someone else's fault. Of course, it couldn't be mine. And then they move on to the next path. And as women, we tend to say, oh my God, I made a terrible mistake. And for my whole team now is bearing the brunt of this mistake that I've made, right? And I think we kind of have to take a step back and say to ourselves, we made the right choice based off the data we had. Our team is following us because we are a good leader, and we need to be honest with our team. Look, I made a mistake. We're going to try this different pivot, and that's okay. And I think it's a lot of internal working, right? And internal coming together with yourself and being okay with the fact that you're not perfect. You're going to make mistakes, but that's how you grow, and that's how the company will grow.
I do wonder, like in all these conversations I've had, I would even say in season 1, it always comes back to empathy, leadership, the authenticity, and the need for connection. And I do feel like we come naturally with that. And then again, like you said, men come with that confidence that we don't have. So I know this isn't your realm of expertise, but maybe when thinking about going through the process of scaling and looking to gain that resilience and that grit, maybe the solution is getting a coach or therapist. Probably. Yeah, that's probably the answer.
There's an element of that. I think it's also, even in your personal life, doing things that cause you to be resilient and have grit. So for me, that was signing up for an Ironman, right? There was no choice but to start to learn how to be resilient, right? You're going to have a tough training day. You're going to have a tough, thing that you're going to have to come back from so you can complete the race. And I think that helped me then in my professional life to say, it's okay if I have a tough day. It's okay if a project doesn't turn out exactly how I expected, because there's going to be another day, right? There's always another training day. And I think putting yourself into situations, even if they're not professional situations, they're personal situations that help you to learn that grit, help you to learn that resilience, can then impact you in your day-to-day work. And also finding a leader who you admire, who you feel like has that resilience, and talking to them about how did you get it? Now, they have to be a truly authentic leader that will be honest with you, because I find that There are oftentimes leaders who will just say, oh, I just figured it out, which isn't helpful, right? You need to understand, how did you figure it out? What did that look like? When you were at your worst, right? And I think as women, we need to be more open and honest with other women about that and about how we worked through it and about the days that we cried in the bathroom and about the days that then we went back to work the next day and we figured it out.
It's funny. I did a recording and we were talking about similar topics of how society needs to be more honest about all of the things. Cause we see the founders and they're like, I launched a business and I exited and it was amazing. And you don't see the in between when you're crying on the floor or setting up your pricing structure, like not knowing what that looks like and not having anywhere to go to figure it out. It keeps coming up. It's going to be a common theme in this season, I imagine. You made a point that I absolutely love, which was doing the Ironman. And I've met several founders who really, they attempt to balance out the chaos of their business and their startup by taking on something completely different that, like the Ironman, probably filled your need to do something outside, get outside, be active, but it also balanced things out. That's actually really smart. So for the listeners, if you're in it, if you're in the weeds and you're struggling, find that balance, find that thing that you can do that fills the cup, but also gets you to do the other things.
It doesn't have to be an Ironman. It can be a sprint. It can be a half marathon, right? It doesn't have to be that, crazy distance. It can be something much smaller, but just find something that, creates that regimen, starts to create a schedule, right? That you are beholden to other than just work.
No, that's really brilliant. So we just touched on how as women we come with that vulnerability, the authenticity, the empathy, but we are also way better at change management. And I know that we had an offline discussion about what that brings to the table. So how women can lean into their natural way of doing it better.
So all of those things you mentioned, right? Our empathy, our ability to connect with people, all of those things are what make us great at change management. Because change management is really about understanding how to lead your team and convince your team that the change is necessary. And so I'm talking about this from the aspect of leading through change. How you personally deal with change is a bit different. So we'll kind of leave that in its own. But leading through change requires you to really be able to rally the troops. It requires you to be able to talk to them about what the current state looks like and why the future state is going to be better and why they need to go through the slog to get from current state to future state. And I personally have found that most women project managers, most women change management consultants are just so good at really being able to rally and stick with the troops to really kind of make that move, as opposed to just saying, this is the change, it's happening, I don't care, get on board or get off the train, right? And so I think in that case, you might lose good talent. You also may not create that discourse where someone feels comfortable enough to say, hey, I get why you want to go there, but why haven't we considered X, Y, or Z? Right. And so allowing your team to kind of participate in that change and bring up things in almost a pre-mortem fashion of, hey, the change could fail because of these things that you don't see. And as women, we're more likely to create that psychological safety for people to feel comfortable to say those things to us because they don't feel like we're going to judge them. They don't feel like we're just going to kind of bull and china shop through them. We're going to actually sit, listen, take it in, and then kind of apply that and maybe make a pivot or a shift in how we're applying that change.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it leads perfectly into my next question, which has to do with mission, vision, values, right? We start out with a business. Most likely it was recommended that you create a mission, vision, values, and your North Star is there and you kind of focus on it. When it comes to scaling, things start to move fast again, and you're going to have need for change management. How do you recommend women get back to their mission, vision, values, or use that to anchor?
So it's so important that that mission, vision, values is not so heavy that it's tough to go back to, right? And so oftentimes when I come in to help companies, I'm like, why is your mission a paragraph? And how come you have 12 values? And how do you expect anyone to be able to know and understand and put their work back towards this, right? 3, maybe 5 are as many things as people are going to be able to kind of remember, be able to stick to. And I think your mission and your vision should be so large that even as you scale and as you are evolving, there are always going to be these targets that you're going towards, right? They're not going to be things that as you scale, you've outgrown it, unless it's you set something too small, right? Or something that was too achievable. And as women, we do tend to do that, right? Because setting that pie in the sky goal is scary. Right. I did that for my own business. I was like, I don't know. What are we, my CPA said, what are you going to do next year? I'm like, and she said, well, do you think you can double your revenue? And I was like, well, you said it, not me. So let's just put that there, And so why do we do that to ourselves? Right. Because we don't want to fail, because we're afraid of failing. And that's something that we have to work through and that we have to kind of understand. And this is, I talk about this a little bit with my younger sister. You have to look at the fear. You have to say, I accept that you're there, but I refuse to listen to you. And then just move forward and set, that big vision, that something sprawling, something that, will really inspire and create that moonshot where, yes, as you march towards it, as you scale, you can still point back to that vision because it's so large that you're just kind of incrementally chipping away at it, as opposed to achieving it and then saying, oh no, now what do? We have to set a whole new vision, whole new mission because we achieved it. That's actually, you shouldn't achieve it, right? You're always striving to achieve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of change management, which can also be very in line with a pivot and like you have major pivots, I wonder if you have seen women that have had to change their mission, vision, values, or reassess it based on a pivot or change management.
I have. And I think in some cases, it's because when they went into business, they thought they had a certain ideal customer, or they thought they had a certain thing that was fueling their passion. And as they started working on the business, they realized that actually wasn't it, right? It just was not doing it for them. In some cases, that's where I've seen people go into coaching, or I've seen them shift from being, a fractional to just consulting. They don't want to be in the day-to-day. They just want to do kind of project-based work. Oftentimes what it really has to do with is not sitting with yourself long enough to understand what your passion is and really kind of going where the money was. And I think oftentimes we think, okay, if someone's willing to pay me for this, then I'm willing to do it. And we have to kind of take that step back and say, do I like doing this? Is this something that I enjoy? Am I, if I'm starting my own company, if I'm building my own thing from scratch, do I really want to spend every day doing this just because it's something that, customers are willing to pay for? And that's where I've actually seen the most adjustments on a mission and vision, is when you haven't really set it yourself. You've let the market dictate it by what people are willing to pay for, instead of really kind of sitting with yourself, which, to be fair, sometimes it's hard to just sit with yourself and, listen and really say, what do I enjoy doing? And then, yes, are people willing to pay for it, but not starting the other way around.
I'm going to put you on the spot. I don't know if you know this answer, but it just brings it up that I can only imagine, and I'm making generalizations and assumptions, which we're not supposed to do, but I have to imagine that process is very different for men. Because I feel like women are more attached to their mission, vision, values, right? Even mine came from my heart. And I feel like maybe that might not be the case with many male founders. So have you seen any of that?
Yes, it's funny you mentioned that. So I think oftentimes male founders tend to be solving a problem. So they've seen a problem and they felt like they needed to solve it. Now, I have seen male founders get very attached to their solution for the problem, even in the face of a customer saying this doesn't actually solve the problem, to the point where they'll try and convince them, yes, it does. You need my product. It will solve the problem. I don't care what you're saying. My idea is the best idea and you should do it, right? Whereas as female founders, I feel like we take it much more personally. We're like, oh my God, they hate our idea. We should redo everything. Let's figure it out. We're not going to take that time to convince them. We're going to listen and we're going to try and adjust. And I think it's definitely, in some cases, it depends on if the founder is coming from the industry versus someone who maybe is a little bit more objective in how they're looking at it. And so it may not be 100% male, female. It may also be, I've been embedded in XY industry. And so I feel like I know that industry so well that, everything that I think must be fact, or I'm coming into a new industry. And so I'm learning. And so maybe I'm okay. The minute I get feedback, I'm going to pivot and adjust. And I think digging in your heels is definitely a bit more that male trait of like, well, no, I know, and I have that. And it comes back to the confidence we talked about earlier, right? And so being able to kind of barrel forward with that confidence versus wanting to kind of take everything in, wanting to kind of have that. And it's really sort of almost like democracy versus monarchy. I had one CEO founder who I worked with who was like, this is not a democracy, like I make all the decisions. And it's like, well, is that the right way to do it? I don't know. Maybe not. You have this whole team of senior leaders who are pretty smart and you've hired them and they know their areas and maybe you should listen. Right. And so it's kind of funny to think about it from that perspective of like, are we taking everyone's opinions into consideration and kind of having a vote? Or is it, a monarchy and it's just that person decides and that's it?
Speaking of scaling, since that's the topic, and it usually takes money to scale, let's dive into the funnest part, the money associated with scaling. What can women do to make that easier? I would love to break it down from both sides. Like, what are some solutions to use the working capital you have to scale? And on the other side, access to capital, looking for capital to scale. What are some hacks there?
We'll start with the access to capital. What I've seen is that you have to be able to really sell your vision and sell your story. A lot of male founders are very good at that, right? Oftentimes they're charismatic. Oftentimes they have a very deep, wide network, and they're not afraid to go to that network and ask them for money. They're not afraid to go to their friends and say, hey, I have this really cool idea. This is going to make you a ton of money. Let's figure this out. Whereas I feel like the female founders I've worked with are more like, well, I have this really cool problem I'm solving and people should care about it. And because they care about it, they should give me money about it. And it's like, well, but like, what's in it for them? Why do they want to? What are you going to, what return are you going to give them? And so meeting those investors where they are and what they care about, and also not being afraid to go to your network and say, hey, I really want to scale this idea. It can be very impactful. Here's my current numbers. This is what I'm projecting my numbers to look like. You really need to get on board now because now is the time, right? It's a rising, rocket ship. And I've seen male founders be much better at that, tapping into the network, not being afraid to talk to their friends of friends, not being afraid to say, who can you introduce me to? Right. And as women, we sometimes think, oh, it feels so transactional. And I think we really have to approach it of you're actually helping them. Because if your company does well, then these investors are going to make money. Right. And so you're helping them. And they're also helping to solve the problem. And this is where it comes into also getting more women investors. So getting more women educated on how to become an angel investor, getting more women educated on participating in seed rounds or becoming an LP at a fund, and then being able to listen to those pitches and identify sometimes with the problems. I read a statistic, and I don't remember exactly where, but that the majority of funding for female wellness and female medical startups is going to men. Doesn't that just make you shake your head?
I'm not surprised.
But that's because they have the networks, right?
Yeah.
They have the networks. They have the people who are writing checks. And we need to get into those rooms. And so when you're thinking about raising capital, you've got to put yourself into situations that you wouldn't normally go to. Start going and mingling in those rooms. Start talking to your friends. Start being introduced to other people. You really have to be able to live, breathe your pitch. And you have to be able to do it to people that may be third or fourth connections, right? That you're starting to get into those loose connections. In terms of the working capital piece of it, that comes to making those bets, placing those bets. So when you think about scaling, I don't recommend scaling the entire business at once. It just puts a lot of tax on your team. It puts a lot of tax on you. But figuring out when you're looking at your unit economics, what part of your business is screaming for scale? And oftentimes you'll be able to figure that out based off of what your customers are saying or based off of where your team is saying, hey, we are getting so much demand and we just can't. And really applying that working capital to that area. What that requires is the ability to say we're pulling back on something else in some cases, right? And oftentimes founders in general are very bad at that because they don't want to pull back on anything. They don't want to say, okay, I need to cut back on this product because my other product is actually doing better. and I'm going to put my money, my eggs in that basket. You have to be able to look at your business holistically. And I think sometimes we look at each product as our little baby, right? And like, no one's going to call the baby ugly, but like, maybe this product isn't the best product. It's not doing as well. It can be repurposed, and really kind of shifting and putting your weight behind where you think you need to scale and where you think you're going to see those numbers.
You said something, and now I can't recall what it was, that I was like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. And I had a good laugh about the baby. You also touched on a ton of stuff in regards to, the access to capital portion. And I think that it's very important that we call things out here. And one thing I think that neither of us have said, and we should say, is that when it comes to the scale and access to capital, if you're going to fundraise, most likely that's going to become your full-time job. Like it becomes everything you're going to do in your business. So for those founders.
You have to get okay with hearing no, because you're going to have, countless meetings. I mean, I was helping a company do a Series B fundraise. We had 97 meetings, and we got 3 yeses out of the whole 97. Right. And so when you're fundraising, you have to be comfortable hearing no, and you have to be comfortable asking for the tough feedback. Oftentimes, they're just going to say, oh, you're not the right stage for us. That's a cop out. There's a real reason they're not investing, right? And you got to try and dig and figure out what that is so you can start to make adjustments. Or they'll say, well, we just talk to us in your next round. That's my favorite. Okay, great. But why not this round? I might not need you next round, right? And so there's generally real feedback. And so one of the things you have to get good at is really being able to read between the lines and understand what is it about either your metrics or the business model or your current customer base that really kind of threw them off. And, were you not aligned with their thesis? What kind of research did you do beforehand? You also want to not just take whatever money is thrown at you. It's so important to make sure that the investor is going to be additive to you. And I think in the early days, we're like, oh, they want to write us a check. Amazing. Well, what strings are coming with that check? And does this person understand and really believe in your vision and your values? Or are they going to try and pivot and adjust you in a way that you don't want to be adjusted? And so not all capital is good capital. I mean, you have to kind of think about who's investing and what onus you'll now have to them. And then also what value they're going to bring to you. Do they have intros that they can make? Are they going to be a good advisor? Do they understand your space? Maybe they'll introduce you to customers. But what value are they bringing to you other than just that check?
Yeah, I hear it a lot and I've said it a lot, that you should always be doing your due diligence on that investor just as much as they're doing on you and your business. Like research, are they aligned in all the different ways? It's like a marriage, right? And it's probably a 7 to 10 year marriage. So get comfortable with that. Make sure it's the right fit. Excellent.
Requires money. So they have to be willing, right? And ready to scale. Yeah. So they may just want, okay, hey, your unit economics look great. We don't want you to change anything. Don't put any more investment. Right? And then you're stuck. You brought them into scale and now they don't want to scale.
I'd love to dig into that. You've seen that. Usually they want the thing to rocket.
They do want the thing to rocket. And I think where I have seen mismatch is in what they've predicted as what will rocket and what the founder believes will rocket. And so, and I think in 2023 is where I really saw the shift away from burning cash is fine as long as you're growing, to sort of, you need to grow efficiently. You need to figure out how to, still grow, but cut your expenses and be more efficient with that capital. And in 2023, and even the beginning of this year, you're seeing that a lot more, which I find so interesting. We had so many conversations, which was sort of, well, we actually want you to be cash flow positive. And it's like, well, if I was cash flow positive, I wouldn't have to come to you for investment, would I? If we were already making enough money to reinvest in the company, then we wouldn't necessarily need you to grow and scale. We would just do it on our own. And so I think there's sort of a balancing act there where some investors, they want those guaranteed returns. And sometimes when you're putting fuel on a product that's not proven yet, there's an element of risk there that they're not willing to take right now in the current market.
I mean, that capital efficient and capital effective is the new black, right?
It is. I'm wondering when it will change, but I think for the foreseeable future, that's kind of where we're at. And I think founders have had a hard time adjusting. And I think 2023 was a really tough year for a lot of founders who sort of felt like, well, now I have to raise a down round because I raised before and everything was sort of free money, here we go. And there's that ego hit of a down round. There's a sort of PR hit with your employees of why now, and having to explain, well, it's just that the market has shifted. It's not that we're doing badly. It's not that, we've done anything wrong necessarily. It's just that, so, when you raise at the height, there you are when things come crashing down.
It's just like buying a home at the height.
Exactly. And you can never time it, right? You can never time it appropriately.
All right. Pivoting this conversation a little bit, I want to dive into the lessons you've seen and that women can take from our conversation in regards to scaling, what you've seen work and hasn't worked when it comes to scaling that our listeners can use.
Surrounding yourself with people who have been there and done it. And so finding people who have scaled in the way you're trying to scale. And I say that because there's multiple ways to scale. You could be scaling an existing product. You could be trying to launch a new product, which will help your business to scale and start to cross-sell and upsell. So finding someone, a leader who you admire, who you feel like has similar values, who has been there and done it and can kind of give you some of the gotchas, whether they hire onto your team or they become an advisor or even in a fractional capacity, where you're able to kind of say to them, here's my plan. This is what I'm thinking. Poke holes in it. Help me figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I think that helps to set you up for success. It helps you to understand how to lead your team and to really get everyone on board with the scaling. The other piece that's really important to set yourself up for success is understanding that you're going to hear a lot of no's and you're going to have a lot of failure on the way for scaling, right? So scaling and rapid growth are hard. They are not, it's not a cakewalk, as they would say, right? There's not, if it was easy, everyone would do it. And so making sure that you understand that you're okay with that you are ready to deal with it, that you are feeling resilient, that you've put all the other pieces of your life into place, because scaling takes a lot of effort. Sometimes just mentally, sometimes mentally and physically, depending on really what you're trying to accomplish. And so understanding that while you're scaling your business is probably not a great time to go back to school, or not a great time to try and move your house, or says the person who renovated and moved during an IPO. So, each their own. But, understanding that your life needs to be in a place while you're scaling where you're going to be able to be successful and you're going to be able to feel like you're focusing on the right things and that you're accomplishing stuff and not crying when the contractor gives you the wrong color cabinets.
It's the perfect moment to beg the question of, so we talked about, using you as an example, when you reached that mission, you knew that you had to reevaluate what was next and scale. Sometimes you don't necessarily know when to. So what would you say are things you can look at in your business to know, now is the time, or next year is probably going to be the time, or oops, I missed it, better do it really soon?
Yeah, great question. I think it's different depending on if you're in a product-based business versus service-based business. So understanding the different levers there, right? And so for a product-based business, and even if it's SaaS, right, understanding that customer load, how many customers can, your team handle? What does that look like? And it requires metrics. It requires having data to understand, okay, once I hit this number of customers, I'm going to have to add 2 more people to my customer success team. Once my revenue projections hit this amount, I need this many salespeople because this is how I've assigned quotas. I think for me, in more of a very strictly service-based business, it's again, the type of work and the number of clients, and thinking through, how do I provide the best service that I can for me as an individual, versus then also bringing on people to do the work that I don't necessarily need to be the one to do. And I think in a service-based business, that's hard because you often think of yourself, especially when you're a solopreneur, as, well, I'm the value. They're paying for me. So if I scale my business, they're not getting me anymore. And so thinking through what are the pieces that are happening behind the scenes, hands on keyboard, where don't necessarily need to be you, but you're the relationship manager, where you're the person who's, keeping that rapport with the customer. You're there providing that strategic value, and then you have someone else behind the scenes. And so for me, that's a project manager who's kind of hands on keyboard, actually creating project plans, right? And I'm the one going to the customer and helping them to deliver against that plan, but not necessarily the one creating it. And so setting those stage gates and really understanding the data around where your time is going and making sure that your time is going to the most valuable tasks.
Thank you for that. That was very insightful. And it led me to another thought that I think, again, we've thrown out a couple nuggets here that I think are super helpful. But one thing you mentioned is solopreneurship. And when it comes to that time, I think that there is that, like, they're paying for me, absolutely. Or that's the selling point is me. So there are other ways to scale without making a huge leap either. Now you can move on to group. Like the access level can be part of your pricing strategy and how you, again, that access to me.
Right, exactly. And also understanding, do you want to scale, or to what level do you want to scale? Maybe you only want to have a certain number of clients because that's what you like. And that's, what makes your life work. And so, you don't need to feel forced into scaling because you think that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. I've met founders that are like, nope, that's it. I want myself, 2 employees. We're going to do this thing at this level. And that's where my happy place is. Like, it's brilliant.
And that's the thing, just be happy with where you are, right? Like in some cases. And I think that goes to regular life and professional life, right? Just saying, wait, do I really want this next level thing that everyone says I should have, or am I happy with where I am now?
Yeah, because that next level thing is probably going to come with strings attached too.
Always strings attached.
Well, wrapping this conversation up, for those tuning in that have loved this conversation and want to connect with you and reach out, how can they do that?
Sure. So I have my website is just katrinapurcell.com, which my amazing husband built for me. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn where you can find me. And I just launched a podcast with a friend of mine, Rachel, which is called the Manage Chaos Podcast. And so that is on all of your podcast listening networks.
So I just want to touch on that. I'm going to put all of that in the show notes, but go check out the podcast because Rachel is also on this podcast. And between the 2 sessions, so many great insights. So go check that out. Awesome. I skipped one of the best parts. So I'm going to do this a little out of order. I always try and close with 3 quick hacks that women can use in the topic of interest. So this would be 3 quick hacks for scaling.
3 quick hacks. So hack number 1, network, network, network. So, that will provide you resources, access to capital. It will provide you resources of people who've scaled before and can help you. So that's definitely number 1. The other one is leaning into your strengths. So lean into your empathy, lean into your ability to evoke emotion among your team to get them to agree to change and agree to scale. And then number 3 is being able to decide when you don't want to scale because you don't have to. And so being able to be comfortable in that decision.
Yeah. And there's always you can always scale and not scale again. You don't have to have the exit or the plan. Like you can choose your own path. Because I went out of order, I'm going to put your contact in the show notes and make sure people have that. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Me too.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. For all the juicy deets on this episode, be sure to check out our show notes or give us a holler on Instagram at Hacking the Patriarchy Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, don't be shy. Please share it with your friends. Sharing is caring after all. Lastly, if you'd like to lend your personal support, please take a moment to tell the world about it with a review on your favorite streaming platform. We'd be forever grateful. Tune in again soon to enjoy a brand new episode of the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. And until next time, keep on hacking, my friends. If you've made it this far, I have one more little thing to share with you. Did you know that this isn't my only feminist endeavor? That's right, there's more. I run a media startup dedicated to providing the most current and pertinent news about women, for women, and by women. Our mission centers on delivering a platform where the latest updates regarding women-led initiatives are extensively covered. highlighting women's actions, accomplishments, perspectives, and other elements that profoundly influence women's lives and contribute to meaningful progress. I invite you to head over to femled.news to learn more.